We stand for the reading. I've created a composite reading again this morning because it points to the topic that I want to treat in the homily. So I've taken a little passage from the book of Genesis, a passage from Psalm 90, and a passage from the second letter of Peter, and I'm just weaving them together to create the context for the homily. So firstly, from the book of Genesis chapter 2. Thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. By the seventh day, God completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all the work which he had done. And from Psalm 90, for 1,000 years in your sight are like yesterday when it passes by, or like a watch in the night. And from 2 Peter chapter 3, do not let this one fact escape your notice, beloved, that with the Lord, one day is like 1,000 years, and 1,000 years like a single day. Words inspired by God. So I want to begin this morning with a kind of a word of explanation about these three readings which I have chosen to give you the context for it. So the first one is from Genesis chapter 2, and it talks about the creation of the cosmos. But it's interesting, it suggests that the creation happened in 6 days and then God rested on the seventh day. In actual fact, a lot of the book of Genesis is plagiarized from much, much earlier writings by the Sumerians, the first civilization on our planet. That goes back to about 3,800 BC. And they're the first ones to talk about the creation of the cosmos. And they did so on 7 great tablets, which obviously became available. And so the notion that creation happened in 6 days and then God rested on the Sabbath is very probably taken from the realization that the accounts of creation are recorded on 7 stone tablets by the Sumerians. So that's where the notion of the 6 days of creation and the 7th day of rest come from. Now, at one stage, if you look particularly within the book of Genesis, and you take it literally, you can actually reconstruct the timeline of human history and of the evolution of the cosmos. So a very famous Irish bishop called Bishop Ussher attempted to do that in the 1600s. And based on the internal evidence of the book of Genesis, he calculated that God started creation on the 23rd of October on the year 4004 BC. And if you take the Bible literally, you can actually deduce that this was the day that God started to create the world. So by taking it literally, he was convinced that the world began on the 23rd of October in the year 4004 BC. So that's the sense you get from the first reading here. That's their notion of time, that God created in 6 discrete days, and it began on October 23rd, 4004 BC. Fast forward a few thousand years, and now the book of Psalms is written probably around the year 1000 BC, attributed to David, but probably coming a little bit later. And in Psalm 90, the psalmist is trying to account for the fact that there's such a discrepancy between the ages of the patriarchs and people's normal lifespan at this stage. So when you read through the book of Genesis again, we're told that each of the patriarchs lived an average of over 900 years. So according to Genesis chapter 4, Adam lived 930 years. His son Seth lived 912 years. Grandson Jared lived 962 years. And Methuselah, the oldest of them all, lived 969 years. But the average was somewhere around the 900s. And then at some stage, because of the sins of human being, God got really upset and he decided he was going to cut down their lifespan radically from 900 years down to 120. And now you could expect to live just 120. People continued to be sinners. So he cut it back again, back down to about 80. And he kept cutting it down as a punishment, so that at the time of Jesus Christ, the life expectancy of a Galilean male at the time of Jesus was 29 years. Now, I'm not saying that everybody died at 29, but that was the life expectancy. The average age of a Galilean male at the time of Jesus Christ was 29 years. So Jesus actually pushed it. He was like one standard deviation beyond it at age 33. So it got worse and worse. And then it began to climb up slowly. Mainly not because of medical advances, but because of engineering advances. It began to creep up into the 30s and the 40s and the 50s, and with the Industrial Revolution, because of engineering feats around sanitation particularly, the lifespan began to move back up towards 80, and it's around the 80s at this stage. And with nanotechnology, the belief system is they can push it out to 120 or even to 100 years. But there's some bad news for us. This generation of American children is the first generation in about 500 years whose life expectancy will be shorter than that of their parents because of obesity, inactivity, and diet. It's the first generation of American children in about 500 years whose life expectancy is shorter than that of their parents. So this is what the psalmist is talking about in Psalm 90. And then you pick up on the second letter of Peter. And Peter is actually referring back to Psalm 90. And he's reminding his audience that in God's eyes, 1,000 years are the same as a single day, and a single day is the same as 1,000 years. And why is he doing this? Because at this stage, the first generation of Christians had been told and were convinced that Jesus was coming back imminently. The second coming of Jesus Christ was going to be just a matter of a few months down the road after Jesus had been crucified. And now an entire generation of Christians has come along, and Jesus still has not come back. So now they're trying to kind of scramble and make sense of this. So then Peter will write his letter and say, you don't understand it. When we talk about the second coming of Jesus Christ, you have to realize that in God's sight, 1,000 years and a single day are the same thing, or a single day and 1,000 years are the same thing. So they're trying to scramble to make sense of the fact that Jesus hasn't come back. And that's the kind of the pretext, the context for what I want to say this morning. Because it has to do with the notion of time and the perception of time. And that's where I want to focus this morning. I want to look at the notion of time. And I'm going to make 3 main points this morning. I'm going to talk firstly about living fractally. What happens when we live fractally? And what does fractal mean? And then I want to talk about time itself, time travel. Is it possible to time travel? And then thirdly, I want to talk about the light body. So there are the 3 points I'll make this morning. So the first one, the notion of living fractally. Fractal is a mathematical equation which allows us to create graphs or models at an infinite number of scales, the same pattern repeating at an infinite number of scales. And the first great mathematician to wrestle with this notion was a great German mathematician called Leibniz, around 1695, created the first mathematical model for a fractal, which would give infinitely recurring patterns at different scales. And I'll give you a very simple example of such a fractal. If you look, for instance, at our model of an atom, and the atom is basically a unit with a nucleus and some electrons inside that are circling around the nucleus. You take that up to the next level, and you've got a planet with its moons in orbit, so it's a fractal. It's the same exact model at a totally different scale. You take that up to a solar system, and now you've got a sun with a whole bunch of planets orbiting around the planet. It's the same pattern again at a different level. You take that up to a galaxy, and a galaxy, is a whole bunch of solar systems that are circulating around the galaxy, and you take it to a cosmic level, and the cosmos itself, has galaxies circling around it. So there is a situation of an obvious fractal, the same pattern recurring at an infinite number of scales. Now, in nature is full of fractals. If you take a coastline is a fractal phenomenon. The same pattern repeats at infinite numbers of scales. If you take ocean waves, they behave fractally. If you take a lightning strike, it behaves fractally. DNA is fractal. Trees, as they grow in their root systems, are fractal. Heartbeats are fractal. So you get fractal actually happening all over nature. You get the same pattern occurring again and again and again at different scales. And I believe then that life itself is fractal, that the notion of reincarnation, where the same pattern repeats again and again and again, is actually a fractal. So fractals can happen in space, or they can happen in time. So in reincarnation, you've got a fractal of time where you're adopting a new timeline with every incarnation, and you've got a fractal of space because you're taking on a different spacesuit, a different physical body in each of these incarnations. So again and again and again, life itself is full of this fractal reality. I want to use 2 movie examples to represent this. So in any one lifetime, you're also living fractally, because any one of us right here this morning is a child of parents. Many of you are parents of children. Many of you are siblings to other brothers and sisters of yours. All of you have friends. All of you have colleagues where you work. And so you're living in this fractal kind of existence where you're living very different kinds of lives or different personas with different people. So even in the course of a single lifetime, you're living fractally. And my favorite example of that is a movie called The Nutty Professor. Any of you guys seen that movie? It's a hilarious movie where Eddie Murphy is playing three different characters. He's playing himself, who is a nutty professor. He's playing his grandmother, and he's playing his grandfather. And there's a hilarious scene. They're at dinner, if you've seen this movie. With the three of them sitting around the dinner, And there's this dialogue going on, and it's absolutely hilarious. But Eddie Murphy is playing all three roles. Now, in some senses, every single one of us is doing the same thing. You're playing a whole bunch of roles in this lifetime, depending on, the relationships of which you're a part. So you're living fractally anyway in this one lifetime. I believe that we're living fractally also because we're living in parallel universes at the same time. Your essence is elsewhere, having radically different kinds of experiences. And sometimes when you dream at night, these will bleed into each other. They'll cross-fertilize with each other. So the question I get asked when I make this statement always is, how come if I'm allegedly living all these other lifetimes, I only have, awareness or consciousness of this one lifetime here? And here's another simple example to illustrate, or a metaphor to kind of explain that. One of my favorite movie stars is Seán Penn. I think he's a brilliant, brilliant actor. So if I were to decide to put on a Seán Penn movie day in the Bay Area, and I prevail upon 10 different movie theatres in the area to put on a different movie starring Seán Penn beginning on Sunday morning at 10 o'clock. And so at 10 o'clock, 10 of Seán Penn's movies are playing over the Bay Area. Now, one of the movies I love is Dead Man Walking. I don't know if you've seen this, where he's a criminal who's, committed murder, and he's on death row, and it's his last day alive, and his family are visiting with him. Another favourite of mine is one called I Am Sam, in which he's a mentally retarded adult who's raising a very bright little daughter, little 6 or 7-year-old daughter. Lovely character, but, really mentally compromised. Now, in the movie I Am Sam, that character, Sam, has no consciousness whatsoever of the other character, the murderer on death row in another movie. But Seán Penn, the actor, is aware that he's playing both of those roles simultaneously in the Bay Area right now. So your soul has complete knowledge of all of the roles you're playing in all of the parallel lives that you're involved in right now. But as the ego in each of the lives, you only have awareness of the character you're playing right now. So you're only aware of the person you're playing right now. If I were speaking to you, and I am, if you listen carefully, in the other role, in the other life, you're aware of that ego in that life, and you think that's the only you that's present. So that's the first point I want to make. The notion that we're living fractally. The second point I want to make then, I want to talk about us being time travelers. You've often heard the expression, when somebody was involved in a very, very scary incident, like an automobile accident or something, they say, oh my God, my entire life flashed before my eyes. You've heard that expression? Or if you read the near-death literature, near-death experience literature, where people have been pronounced clinically dead. And they have these out-of-body experiences. Part of the out-of-body experience is some kind of a life review. And they go through their entire lifetime, incident by incident. And not only do they see the entirety of their own life, they get to experience it from the viewpoint of every single person involved in every single incident. And it's not like I'm just wondering, I wonder what Rebecca was thinking, when I said that to her. It's not that. I am Rebecca in that incident, as well as being Seán in that incident, and I experience it from both perspectives. And I see it for its consequences. Not only do I see the event itself, an encounter I've had with Bernadette, but I see what that does to Bernadette and how she will take that with her into her relationship with Lisa, and how Lisa will take that into her relationship with Ron, and I see the consequences of it spreading out through history. And this is the notion of karma. And that allows us very, very quickly to begin to start thinking lovingly and acting lovingly. When we see the sequelae, the consequences of every decision and every choice and every thought and every word that we're speaking. And so in some senses, now the question that I ask myself then is, has time slowed down? So does time appear to slow down, or does it actually slow down? I want to deal with those two possibilities for a few moments. Does time appear to slow down? So there's something happening that appears to make time move very, very differently from its normal pace? I think it does, in the sense that typically most of our processing is offline. The vast bulk of human processing is at the unconscious level. More than 95% of our processing is at the unconscious level. Of all the sensory, impulses that are reaching your eyes and your ears and your tactile sense right now, you are unaware of 95% of them. They're going straight into your unconscious. You're only aware about 5%. When something really dramatic or traumatic happens, all of a sudden your sensorium comes online really, really, really quickly. It's like your eyes and your ears open up and you start sucking in data at a huge rate. And you begin processing it much more efficiently in your brain. And so in that sense, time appears to slow down. And I was thinking about this morning. Could I come up with a metaphor? And I came up with the following metaphor. At 7:52 a.m. on the 20th of May in 1927, Charles Lindbergh set off in the spirit of St. Louis to attempt the first solo flight across the Atlantic. And he set off, and he had 4 sandwiches, a few bottles of water, and 451 gallons of aviation fuel. And at some stage, he reported, he had to fly within 10 feet of the ocean because of the cloud formation he couldn't see. He was down at 10 feet above at some stages. And 24 hours into his flight, he comes across a fishing boat, and he's wondering where is he. So he comes right down over the little fishing boat, and he's trying to make contact with the guys. And he wants to know where Ireland is. And he's shouting down, "What direction is Ireland?" And the guys are looking up at him, and he realizes, of course, he finally figures out he's down around Dingle, the southwest of Ireland. They don't speak English. In 1927, they certainly didn't speak English. They were speaking Gaelic. And the guys are looking up at him. They have no idea what he's saying. So he figures out from the coastline he must be around Dingle. And he starts going southwest, and he landed in France. It took him 33 and a half hours for the journey. A journey of 3,160 miles. 33 and a half hours. Now, so there's one passenger, and it took 33 and a half hours to get from New York to Paris. Now, imagine today an Airbus 380 with 800 passengers flying the same route, probably less than 5 hours. And so it'll do it in 1/7 of the time, and it'll carry 800 more passengers than he could. So it's 7 multiplied by 800, 5,600 times more efficient as a flying machine than Charles Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis. Now, in some senses, that's what's happening in a traumatic situation with people. Our carrying capacity, our sensorium, is 800 times better drinking information. And our speed, our airspeed, is much faster in processing the information. And so what appears to happen then is that it appears as if time is slowing down, because we've processed a whole bunch of information in a very short period of time that would have taken us much, much longer. So the only explanation we come up with is, it seemed like time slowed down. It was operating at a different pace. So that's one explanation. The other explanation is that time does indeed slow down. And in fact, we know from Einstein's theory of relativity that as we approach the speed of light, time goes to zero and space shrinks down to nothingness. So before Einstein, there was another very famous Dutch mathematician called Lorentz, who created a formula that showed what this was. And it's not a linear equation. So if you could travel at 98% of the speed of light, time would be halved. So if you went on a year's journey into space, traveling at 98% of the speed of light, and came back at the end of the year, people on Earth would have aged 2 years. If you could travel at 99% of the speed of light, and you traveled and came back in a year's time, people on Earth would have aged 7 years. And if you could travel at 99.9999999% the speed of light, that's 99 followed by 9 decimal places of nines. If you traveled for a year at that speed, when you came back, people on Earth, the Earth itself, would have moved 22,360 years. So you're really, really at this stage, things are radically, radically different. And if you could travel at the speed of light, time would stop. And space would shrink to zero, literally. And therefore, there would only be the here and the now. The entire universe would be right there, and time would have stopped. So you'd literally just be in the here and the now. So what would that look like? If you could be here now, it means that literally all of your past lives, all of your future lives, all of your present life, all of the events that occurred, that could occur, they're right there, right now. And everything and everybody, the most distant star and the most, antique historical character are right there and now. There is only the present moment. There is only the here and now. What would that lead to? Which is my third point. I want to talk then about the light body. Because in some senses, the light body is the level of us that processes information at the speed of light. And in actual fact, even your physical body is a light entity. Your physical body has roughly about 10 to the power of 14 cells in it. Roughly 100 trillion cells. Somewhere between 70 trillion and 100 trillion. So about 10 to the 14 cells in your body. Every cell in your body has about 10 to the power of 14 atoms attached. And every atom has a photon of light. And so you got literally 10 to the power of 28 photons of light, even in your physical body. So if we knew how to do it, if we could release just the photons of light in a single human body, it would light up a baseball stadium at 1 million watts for 3.5 hours. So that's just your physical body. Now, let alone the fact that you've got an etheric body, you've got an astral body, you've got a mental body, you've got a causal body, then you've got your soul, and there's Brahmanic cosmic consciousness. So how much light is there in the system? Now, what would happen if you could actually access your light body? For one thing, there would be no past or no future, there would just be the now. There would be no there versus here, everything would be present. And so the idea of dematerializing, rematerializing would be a cinch. This is what Jesus is doing, in his resurrection. He's inhabiting his light body at that stage. There's evidence in Tibetan Buddhism that the same thing happens with some of these great teachers, that at the moment of death, they sit in meditation and they literally evaporate into a rainbow body. They let go, their molecular structure reduces itself down to its photonic level and disappears, as just a rainbow body. So there's lots of evidence that these things actually happen. So what would happen then if we can access that level of ourselves? It means then we're totally present everywhere, all of the time. And there is only the now. And since there is only the now, there is only the love of God being present to us. So I'm convinced that physical reality as we experience it is an artifact of kind of three factors. So light produces the material of life. Sound produces the blueprint for life. And incarnation produces the labor to assemble them. So if you were to build a house, you need three things. You need a blueprint, you need materials, and you need labor. And you bring these three things together and you create a physical, three-dimensional house that you can actually inhabit. And that's exactly what we do. The materials come from light. Sound, or the Logos, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made by Him, and without Him was made nothing that was made. This Word of God, this Logos, this sound of creation actually creates the blueprint for life. And then the labor force is produced by incarnation itself. So every one of us, the physical body that we inhabit, is an artifact of these three forces: light, sound, and incarnation. And our job is to remember that we are love.